3 sisters were presented for the Duke to marry. He chose the quiet woman pouring the tea. The tea had gone cold twice, and still no one told Eleanor Whitmore to stop pouring it. She stood at the edge of the drawing room in her grey dress, the plainest one she owned, refilling cups that her sisters barely touched. Cordelia laughed too loudly at something the Duke had said. Beatrice tilted her head just so, the way their mother had taught her, catching the afternoon light. And Eleanor poured. That was her place in this room. It had been her place for 3 years. The Duke of Ashcombe had come to Belmore at his mother's insistence, to choose a bride from among the county's finest families. The Whitmores were not the wealthiest, but they were proud, and desperate in a way they worked very hard to hide. 2 daughters had been dressed, coached, and presented like the last good silver in the house. The 3rd daughter had been given a teapot. "You're very quiet," the Duke said. Eleanor looked up, startled. He wasn't speaking to Cordelia. He wasn't speaking to Beatrice. He was looking directly at her, over the rim of a cup she'd just filled. "Forgive me, Your Grace," she said. "I wasn't aware I was expected to speak." Something shifted in his face. Not offense, but recognition, as though she'd said something he hadn't heard in a long time and had been waiting for. Her mother's smile tightened from across the room. "Eleanor manages the household," she said quickly. "She isn't, that is, she wasn't raised for company the way her sisters were." It wasn't entirely a lie. It also wasn't the truth. The truth was that 3 years ago, Eleanor's father had made a private arrangement with a widowed landowner 2 villages over, a man twice her age who needed a wife to raise his children and settle his household, in exchange for forgiving a debt that would have cost the Whitmores their home. Eleanor hadn't been asked. She'd been informed gently, the way one is informed of a death. Since then, she had stopped being presented to anyone. She poured tea instead. It was easier for everyone if she simply became part of the furniture. The Duke set down his cup. "I'd like to see the gardens," he said. "Miss Eleanor knows them best, I imagine, since she's the one who tends them." Her mother's smile did not move, but her eyes did, sharp warning. "Beatrice would be delighted to." "I asked for Eleanor." The walk to the gardens was silent for the first several minutes. Eleanor kept her hands folded, waiting for whatever this was to reveal its purpose. Dukes did not ask servants, for that was in practice what she'd become, to walk with them alone. "You don't remember me," he said finally. "I don't believe we've met, Your Grace. 4 winters ago. A storm on the North Road. A carriage wheel broken outside a farmhouse that wasn't much warmer than the road itself." He glanced at her. A young woman gave a half-frozen stranger her own coat and a bowl of soup she'd clearly meant for her own supper, and never once asked who he was. Eleanor stopped walking. The memory arrived all at once. A man in mud-soaked clothes, exhausted, refusing to say his name, eating in near silence at her family's kitchen table while she mended his torn sleeve by candlelight because it seemed unkind to let a stranger leave in tatters. He'd left before dawn. She had never learned what became of him. "That was you," she said quietly. "I told no one who I was that night because for the first time in years, someone was kind to me without wanting anything from me." He held her gaze. "I have thought of that kitchen more than I have thought of any ballroom I've stood in since." "Your Grace." "Edmund," he said. "That night I was only Edmund." She didn't know what to say to that, and for once, her silence wasn't obedience. It was simply that no one had ever asked to know her, only to display her. But hope, when it arrives too suddenly, rarely arrives alone. That evening, her father called her into his study, and she understood before he spoke that something had gone wrong. Mr. Halloway, the widower to whom she'd been quietly promised, had heard of the Duke's interest and had come to collect on an old understanding, reminding her father that a debt forgiven was a promise made, and a promise, once made, was not undone because a Duke had asked a woman to walk in a garden. "You gave your word," Eleanor said, and her voice, usually so careful, cracked. "You gave it without asking me. And now you'll take it back the same way." Her father wouldn't meet her eyes. "The debt is real, Eleanor. If Halloway calls it in, we lose the house. Your sisters lose their futures." I did what a father does. You did what was easiest, she said. You just never called it that. She left the study with her hands trembling, though not, for once, from years of practiced restraint. It was something closer to grief, for the version of her life that had, for one afternoon, felt possible. Word of the arrangement reached the Duke by morning, carried, as such things often are, by a servant eager to please Cordelia, who saw an opportunity to remove the sudden rival she hadn't known she had. When the Duke arrived at Belmore uninvited, his carriage still dusty from the road, Eleanor's mother met him at the door with a smile stretched too thin to hide behind. Your Grace, I must apologize for any confusion. Eleanor is, unfortunately, already spoken for. By whom, he said, was she asked. The silence that followed answered him more clearly than words could have. He found Eleanor in the garden, exactly where he'd first truly seen her, cutting away the dead heads of the roses with the same quiet care she gave to everything no one else noticed. She didn't look up right away. I know about Mr. Halloway, he said. Then you know it isn't your concern. I'd like it to be. He waited until she finally met his eyes. I am not asking your father. I'm not asking Halloway. I'm asking you, Eleanor. Would you have me? You barely know me. I know a woman who fed a stranger her own supper and asked for nothing. I know a woman who has spent 3 years making herself invisible so her family could survive, and never once complained where anyone could hear her. I would like the chance to know the rest. Her hands stilled on the rose stem. And if I say I'm frightened, that being seen after so long feels almost worse than being overlooked, then I would say that is the most honest thing anyone in this house has said to me since I arrived. It was her father in the end, who settled what pride and debt could not. He came to the garden himself, older suddenly, and stood before his youngest daughter with something that might have been shame. I sold your silence for a debt, he said. I've regretted it every day since, and told myself regret was enough. It isn't. Halloway's debt is mine to answer for, not yours to pay with your life. He turned to the Duke. If she'll have you, she has my blessing. Not because you're a Duke. Because you're the first person in years to ask her a question instead of giving her an instruction. Eleanor looked between the two men, and then, finally, at the roses she'd tended for 3 quiet years without a single person asking what she wanted for herself. Yes, she said. I would have you, Edmund. The wedding was smaller than her sisters expected and grander than her mother had once believed possible for the daughter who poured the tea. Cordelia and Beatrice attended, still faintly stunned. Mr. Halloway's debt was settled honestly, without a bride attached to it. And when Eleanor stood at the head of the table in her new home, someone offered to pour her tea for once, and she found she had to sit down for a moment before she trusted her own voice enough to thank them. She had spent years believing that being unseen was simply her place in the world. It had taken one honest stranger, remembered across 4 winters, to show her it had only ever been the place others had built around her. What would you have done if the family that raised you had quietly decided your future without ever asking your name? If this story moved you, share it with someone who has ever felt overlooked, and tell us in the comments. Do you believe kindness like Eleanor's always finds its way back? Engagement question. Do you think quiet kindness, given without expectation, always finds its way back to the giver?